Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lora Cecere, founder of Supply Chain Insights, to the stage.
Well, welcome, and welcome to the 200 people that are on our virtual feed. I deliberately played an old video. That video was from 2016. 85% of the people that spoke in that video retired. I have been doing this event for 10 years, hoping to drive different outcomes and have people think differently. And it's my hope that we can do some breakthrough thinking at this event to be able to move supply chains to a better place. So the conference goes through 4 main tracks. The first is thinking about Supply Chain 2030. We'll share some research. Steve is going to talk about healthcare and how we move from efficient sickness to wellness. Then we're going to talk about ESG and ESG compliance and ethical labeling. And then we're going to move to a discussion of Web 3.0 and social tokens. The digital supply chain will then move through a discussion of supply chain excellence as we celebrate the Supply Chains to Admire award winners. And we'll also be talking about new forms of analytics. And I got to tell you how depressing it is when I look at the recent research, the number of people that don't know the power of no code, no SQL, don't really understand how to use unstructured data. And I want to really have an awakening in the analytics section around digital optimization, simulation, thinking about new forms of analytics. And then we'll celebrate the work of outside-in processes. And you've seen at lunch some of the drawings of the rivers of demand and the outside-in exercise. So you might say, well, what is that all about? It is to change the paradigm. Demand planning, supply planning grew up in the 1980s when we were really arguing about 32-bit, 64-bit architectures, the movement from client-server, the cloud. But we didn't really change our brains and how we think about demand and supply. And we didn't really think about demand as a flow. So as we look at ontologies and we look at graph technologies, we have the opportunity to move from relational database kind of paradigms to think about demand as a flow, and not just think about demand to be consumed into limited architectures like DRP, but to think about it as it flows from the customer's customer, the supplier's supplier. So the river of demand is designed to be an awakening for us to change that paradigm. Then we're going to talk about supply chain talent. One of the things that really disturbs me is the turnover of talent. We've lost a lot of leaders, either to death or retirement, first and second generation supply chain leaders. And we need to build a new generation of talent, and we need to challenge them to think differently. So I want you all to be leaders to drive that differentiation. The name of the conference is Imagine. And I'm going to ask each of you in small groups to take the information and in your group imagine new ideas, how those new ideas can really help you with a different mental model. I'm going to ask you to throw away your old mental model, and I'm going to ask you to challenge yourself about the current paradigm that you hold, because the 32 months of disruption that we've had in the pandemic show us that supply chains are brittle and they broke, and that we need to think differently. Things like control towers and risk management are really passé kind of concepts. They don't fit in the world of extreme demand and supply variability. Instead, we need to cut down the latency of the signals and reduce the time to act. So there are fewer people in the room. There are 200 people on the virtual feed. They're from around the world. They're doing a lot of gamification. If you're a technologist, they're looking at your digital showcase. You may get some questions or answers. My goal is to build a digital environment so that we can have extreme networking in the room and online. And here, we'll have receptions and dinners. I encourage you to get to know everybody. It's a small group, so you'll have the ability. We'll have structured networking. Tomorrow night, we go to the Air and Space Museum, and you might say, well, why are we doing that? As you go, I want you to look at the innovators whose dreams took flight. I want you to think about how do you become a leader to change supply chain management. We have table discussions on the back of everybody's badge or numbers. You'll move from table to table to have very good conversations with different people. I encourage you to share on social media. The hashtag is Imagine2030. We have our fun run tomorrow. We have the visual facilitator over here. And of course, we have the book that we'll be giving out. And the genesis of the book is I do a blog and I write every week about what I see in supply chain. And I had a client by the name of Joe, and Joe's now deceased, but Joe said to me, Lora, it's really hard for me to read your blog because the only one I see is the one on top. I don't see the rest. Is there a way that you can make it more consumable? So every year I do a printed book, and I also do an ebook so that people around the world can read a year of writing to get reflection about how supply chains changed. And I've done that for 7 years. So if you go to my website, you can see all of the books and the ebooks that I've published. And it's useful to look at that for perspective. And this month, I'll also publish a case study book that goes through 10 years of case studies to really look at supply chain leadership. And I'm going to today talk about the role of leadership, because I don't think we talk about it enough, because I think the missing ingredient in much of what we do is in leadership. So I'm going to ask you to participate. You've got little signs. If I ask you a question and you agree, you'll hold up green. And if you don't, you'll turn it over and we'll see red. So let's just play. How many of you are familiar with Web 3.0? Let's see. Okay, I'm seeing. Good. Turn your badges over or your paddles over so that the camera can see it. So as we go along, we're going to ask you to just hold up, and it's also a way that you can look around the room. How many of you are familiar with NFTs? Okay, a few more. Good, 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 good. Okay, so it's a way that we can participate with each other. Now, we're also going to participate in an activity called brain writing. And I love this LinkedIn post by Adam Grant. I follow Adam on LinkedIn, and I'd encourage you to do as well. He said, when people meet to brainstorm, good ideas are lost because people want to conform. They don't want to rock the boat, right? But a better activity, he says, is brain writing, to basically write what you're feeling and what you're seeing into images. So you have your own little whiteboard, and you've got your markers, and you've got your erasers. So as we go along in each section, I want to encourage you to brain write, because you'll use these whiteboards in the networking activity that we have planned for you later on. You also have on your desk the rivers of demand that are drawn so that you can look at them and refer to them as we think about the paradigm. Because this conference is all about learning from the past to unlearn to drive new outcomes. Now, when I work with business leaders, they'll often say, I don't know what to do with the change management, Lora. And most of the time, it's not change management. There's a need for unlearning. And unlearning is fundamentally hard because we're proud of what we know. We don't understand why other people can't see and understand what we see. But this exercise of unlearning, I think, must precede digital transformation. And the unlearning, is it as easy as riding a bike? I don't know. Let's watch a video.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Salem. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. All right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, here we go. Wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Oh, no! All right, back up. Okay, wait.
Keep your feet on the pedal. Go.
Go right off.
Just keep your feet on the pedals.
Yeah, come on.
All right, one more time. Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road.
So why did I play this video? Knowledge is not understanding. Your neural pathways are hard-coded for a paradigm that doesn't work. The order does not represent demand. Channel data represents demand. Safety stock does not represent what we need to do in the management of inventory. It's the form and function of inventory that we need to really focus on. The integrated supply chain is brittle and breaks. We need to focus on synchronization and interoperability. There's a big difference between the integrated supply chain and the supply chain that's synchronized and interoperates. 80% of the data for the normal supply chain is not used. It lays outside our current systems, and there's no way to put it in the system. Unstructured data, streaming data, image data. So I want you to challenge yourself for your existing paradigms. Could demand be a flow? Could it be outside in? Could we reduce latency so that we could see the channel at the speed of the market? Could we optimize and drive insights market to market to drive bidirectional orchestration? I believe all of this is possible, but it starts with our mental model. It starts with us saying what we have today is not good enough. And my goal is to challenge you to walk out these doors and agreeing with me. Because I believe the industry is in a groupthink mode. We are selling the same technology that we designed in the 1980s, despite the fact that we have new forms of analytics and we have a lot more data. We have a lot of events where traditional leaders talk about end-to-end supply chain. I do not believe we have end-to-end processes or end-to-end technologies. And I'm going to show you some data that I hope that I can prove this to you. So I want you to challenge the neuroplasticity, what a wonderful word, in your brain and get out of groupthink. So we're going to spend 15 minutes now, not 20, because I got to keep this on time. Introduce yourself to your table. Challenge yourself about why unlearning is so hard. And Steve, you can join this table because I don't want you to feel by yourself. And then the third question is, what did you learn from the river demand activity? And then I'm going to ask you to give me feedback for 5. So you have 15 minutes to do this exercise. Bring up the house lights if you don't mind. Okay, are we about ready? Alex, you got a mic? Christine's got a mic? What we're going to do is go from table to table. If I could ask this table to go back to your original seats, just so you can see the presentation. So let's go from table to table. Christine, let's do Marty's table here. So why is unlearning so hard, Marty? Or who wants to answer?
So I think, like everybody, we came up with a variety of reasons why unlearning is so difficult, and a lot of it kind of comes down to bias. We know what we know, we're comfortable with what we know. Getting outside of our comfort zones might mean failure. Getting outside of our comfort zones, we say we want to make data-driven decisions, but what if we don't trust the data? So we think unlearning is very difficult because of who we are and the successes we've had based on what we've done.
Okay, so it's uncomfortable. And did you have any insights from the river demand activity? Did you get that far? Okay, how about Bill's table up here? Bill and JB? Tell us what your insights are. Why is unlearning so hard?
We felt that it was a function of not having, if you don't have an outside influence, it's very difficult to unlearn. Because you're so caught up in running the business and focusing on making the process work on a day-to-day basis that if you're not disrupted, like we were all disrupted obviously over the past couple of years, but something that comes in from the outside and says, you know, get your head out of the sand for a moment, do something different. And until you do that, it's not going to happen. And we talked about even at an individual basis, you may have somebody come in who unlearns, but they can't influence the whole organization. So that our consensus, I think, was that it needs to be an outside
There has
exercise.
to be a reason, an outside-in reason to unlearn,
Right.
and we haven't had enough impetus. Okay, any river demand insights?
No, we didn't get that far
Okay,
either.
how about the middle table here? Jenny? Tell us about your conversation.
Yeah, we actually had both of those first two, so I'm glad that we're not last. If I
Okay,
had
all right.
to add a new one, I'd say one that came up at our table was about listening. So just being open to those new ideas and really allowing those to come in. One I'll add too, since you already put Adam Grant up there, I definitely recommend his book, Think Again. It is all about unlearning and retraining yourself. And we also did not get to the river of demand.
Okay, all right. Nicole, did you have a conversation back there you want to share?
We had a conversation. It was basically unlearning. What we were more reflecting on that we do in technology companies things we did 20 years back. Software didn't change, and therefore the implementation approach didn't change. And you were mentioning, he was mentioning a great example, just if I had a sweater in SM large last year, it doesn't tell me anything about the fashion next or this year. So why do we do systems and improve still systems which are not really able to capture? So from an unlearning perspective, I had the aha effect from the conversation. Well, nothing didn't change. Nothing changed since 20 years since I am in the industry for implementing things. So unlearning is a hard thing because nobody was even questioning it.
Okay. Larry, your table. Who wants to do it? Sean, Larry, don't all you gentlemen raise your hands first. Madhav. Sean?
Yep, unlearning is pretty difficult because unlearning is not something you can teach somebody, right? It is a practice you have to get into, and it may take years. But the river of demand, what it is teaching us is when we went through that, is you don't have to learn how to do A as B, maybe B as D. That's learning a different way of doing it as silos. Instead of that, if you try to forget about the knowledge you have and look into the entire river of demand as a learning, once you get the new learning, maybe there is a chance that you can do the new learning. That's what we understand.
By changing the paradigm, we change how we think about data, how we think about flow, how we think about work. You know, my whole goal is to democratize planning and move it to the business leaders. You know, whoever thought we would have hundreds of planners and organizations, 94% of decisions are made on Excel spreadsheets. I mean, like, are we proud of that? Let's go to the back table. Matt, you joined this table over here. Tell us about your discussion on unlearning.
I think we agree with a lot of comments have been made here, but one of the things on unlearning is really around people's own vested interest. In an organization, I'm trying to achieve my bonus for the year. And I know how to achieve my bonus through doing things the way that I've always done them. And if I unlearn, then there's a fear that actually I'm not going to be able to achieve the targets that I've been set. So there's this fear element, and there's also, where's my personal vested interest?
Okay, which comes down to leadership, right?
Yeah.
Wrong bonuses drive the wrong behavior, right? As long as we reward functional silos and efficient supply chains that are around the lowest cost, we are never going to be effective in serving customers. Okay, one more table. Christine? Why is unlearning so hard?
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
We didn't come to a defined answer. We talked a lot about support from your teams and your executive leadership. But as I was sitting here thinking and listening to everybody, to me, it's about forward-looking, future thinking and end-to-end thinking. A lot of people just don't think that way, and they need to learn.
What a wonderful gift. Yes, I agree. So let's look forward, but let's think back. 32. We have been through 32 months of disruption. Remember March 2020, the lockdowns? Do we need masks? Let's wash our hands. Let's wash all the groceries. Let's put all the mail in the sunlight. To, oh my gosh, what's happening? When will we get vaccines? When will we ever get back to offices? 20% of the office space is going to be not utilized. 32 months of disruption after disruption after disruption after disruption. Disruption is our new normal. How did we do? Well, when we asked supply chain leaders and people that filled out the survey, thank you very much. I love it when people fill out my surveys on LinkedIn. My goal is you give to me, I give to you. 7% said they managed very well. 31% said we had some issues, but we did okay. 46% said they managed by brute force. 15% said they struggled. This is not a bell curve, right? 2 and 3 really struggled. 82% of this group have supply chain planning. 94% primary tool used is Excel. The companies that are in the managed well had a digital transformation strategy And they primarily use descriptive analytics on top of supply chain planning as a system of record, not as an optimization tool. So what has happened is supply chain planning has become more of a system of record to connect people, and we've lost sight of supply chain planning as a decision support tool to really drive better decisions. Those that had descriptive analytics did much better than those that didn't. Those that were aligned, I'm going to share some data with you, did much better than those that were not. Now, we think about supply chain one size fits all. But supply chains come in different shapes, forms, organizational structures. And those that had a strong leader did better. So when the digital transformation reported to the chief operating officer or to a supply chain leader that had both source and make together, they did better. Those that did worse were focused on IT standardization and ERP. Okay, now let me just say that again. Those that did worse were focused on IT standardization and ERP end-to-end transactional efficiency. Okay? What is the paradigm that needs to change? Well, outside in, use of data, and as technologists, we focused on making better engines, optimization, but those optimization engines can't work if the data can't be modeled, right? Many times people don't look at the coefficient of variation of demand and they try to model demand data that is not really forecastable. Or they don't really think about how do they manage the inputs, right? So most people put lead times in when they first put the system in and they left it, right? Lead time's never going to change. Well, lead time has huge variation in this period of time. Not only the averages, but the variation, right? And inventory should be based upon demand and supply variability. We did not adapt for that. So let's look at organizational alignment before the pandemic. I write a lot about the gap between the sales teams and the operations teams. And those pains are huge. Anybody that works in manufacturing or retail, I mean, we live this every day. But look at manufacturing and procurement. This gap grew in the last decade as procurement started reporting through the chief financial officer and the lack of alignment between manufacturing and procurement. We always assumed we could get supply. We always assumed we could get transportation. Our transportation architectures are focused on how do we get the lowest cost, not actually building a feasible plan, because we never had transportation as a constraint. But let's look at organizational alignment during this 32-month period. Now, this is on a 1 to 7 scale. So, for example, the gap between supply chain planning and manufacturing for users was 6.8, which is represented here as 91%. Huge gap. The perception of technologists was not such a big gap. Look at the gap between logistics and supply chain planning. Huge gap. No technology today carries a planned order into transportation to come up with a feasible transportation plan with all of our variability. Look at the difference between logistics and procurement. Huge gap. Look at the different perspectives of technologists telling us what best practices are and business users. The supply chain planning taxonomies that we're putting in today are the same that we designed in the 1980s. We can't be proud of that. Now, where were the gaps, right? So headline news, you see a lot of gaps. Yeah, there were shifts in demand. Early on, huge shifts in demand. Increases in volume as we went from services to products. We had a lot of supply availability issues. We had a lot of issues with ocean transport variability. But the biggest issue was inventory. I bought this shirt on Walnut Street in Philadelphia last week for $1. There was a buy one, get one sale. But if I bought 3, I got them for 60%, and if I bought 4, I got them for an 80% discount. And you know what? I was the only person in the store. Kohl's, Macy's, Walmart, Target, Bon-Ton, go on, are having fire sales on inventory. Our containers are full. Our warehouses are full because we've not done a good job of managing inventory. We have raped the planet's resources to make the wrong inventory. And we've done that for 5 reasons. We're not designing our supply chain. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Only 9% of companies actively design their supply chains. We're not looking at form and function of inventory and the tie of variability. Executives don't understand the role of inventory in the supply chain. They think that it's a lever to pull for the end of the year, right? We're not really looking at supply variability. And we had a lot of port issues. Okay, now we're going to talk about the port issues, and let's hope that they get better. But those other issues are things that we need to unlearn. Knowledge does not equal understanding. Our knowledge of inventory is insufficient. Now, when we look at digital transformation strategies, people that had one did better. And there'll be people on the stage tomorrow, they'll talk about their digital transformation studies. And most people, when they talk to me about digital transformation, they'll say it pretty quick and glib. Yep, I'm working on a digital transformation study. And I say, what does that mean? And they look at me like, aren't you the dumbest analyst in the world? Well, you may think I am. But, leave that for later. But people that had a digital transformation study did better. But what were they focused on? It was all across the board. Primarily focused on, I'm going to do order to cash, procure to pay better, transactional efficiency, software robots. Okay, that doesn't get us out of the gap. Improved analytics for decision making. When I show you the data tomorrow, you're going to see that we were really focused on descriptive analytics. We missed the opportunity at the boardroom to say, we really need to do things differently. We need to invest in warehouse automation and robotics. We need to really look at how we redesign things outside in. We need to embrace innovation for analytics. We missed the opportunity in those 32 months. We continue to do the same old things. And if you do the same old things faster and you've got bad results, guess what you get? Bad results, right? Now, when I asked people about supply chain planning, what they expected versus the reality in this period, they wanted end-to-end visibility. Well, our current supply chain planning taxonomies were never designed for end-to-end visibility. Procurement's a whole, transportation's a whole. They also wanted decision-making on real-time data. Supply chain planning should never be real-time. You can bring real-time data into the planning master data layer. You can look at variation. But planning is looking at how do I make better decisions outside of lead time and how do I consume that in the operational horizon. They wanted better collaboration. I think planning should deliver that. There's a gap. But look, what we did was we improved customer satisfaction because we had a system of record across the organization that was not aligned. We weren't better at inventory, but we improved customer service. And we improved our metrics. So what can we learn from that? We're trying to put new forms of analytics on top of the engines. Lots of people talk to me about AI, so I'm putting better math in the engine. But I'm not really thinking about what does that engine do and how does that engine tie to policy and strategy, and should I have a different taxonomy and should I go about this differently? And that's our opportunity. Now, people will talk to me about visibility. I love to talk about visibility. I've had a network of network share group, which I'm going to send out an invite on my LinkedIn email, and people like Peter and Christine have been on that group for a while. It's tough because we're not investing in networks. And we must invest in network to get to our corporate social responsibility goals. But if you look at what people say is important and what they feel that they're effective, you can see that the least important is manufacturing visibility, and that's where we've done most of our investment. Supplier visibility, logistics visibility, and even enterprise visibility are large gaps. Because we haven't set up the systems to really give us visibility across systems, across nodes, across companies, and we've not embraced unified data models. We've not embraced interoperability. We have foolishly focused on integration, which hardwires data without semantics. Now, Sean sits in the audience. He's a great person to talk about interoperability and unified data models. So, raise your hand, Sean. You'd be glad to have a meeting with him at coffee. I really believe that we need unified data models. We have 8 to 9 advanced planning systems per organization, and we cannot really get there. So let's have a quick talk for 5 minutes on your table. What's your biggest insight from this data? 5 minutes. Okay, let's get the mics. So Christine, you got a mic? We're going to run mics again. So what is your insight and what are your takeaways? Alma, you want to start?
Sure. So we were talking about some of the key insights, Laura, and what you said about the ERP, and the IT standardization, and how the companies did worse when they were focusing on that side. And doing some old things faster equals still bad results, so that was also another topic that was brought to the table. And we were just surprised about the gaps between some of the areas in the manufacturing and the procurement, the supplier, our goal of end-to-end supply chain visibility, and how far are we from ever achieving that as our systems are completely disjointed and they don't talk to each other.
I get so funny when people talk to me, I'm going to have that end-to-end supply chain, and then I look at the gaps, right? And I'm like, where are we on leadership? Rick, tell us about your table.
Well, we were having a couple of conversations, one about how powerful customer relationship management capabilities are. And then the second thing we talked about was just the ongoing need to educate board members and executive committee members about the value of the tools and integrated tools in the supply chain as they're making a series of choices across the enterprise, some connected to the supply chain and some not.
And so how do you think we do that?
Well, I think it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing effort for education to make sure they understand how value gets created when you have these tools, these capabilities. And it really is multiple dippings. That's what we've seen in our organization. The first time you talk about a certain capability, even if you attach a value creation number to it, there's not necessarily the immediate understanding or belief, but as you talk about it further and you expand the business case, that starts to get people pretty interested.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Madhav, how about your table?
Sure, I think the couple of insights is the biggest gaps seem to be around logistics and the functional boundaries, procurement and supply chain as an example, right?
Right.
Didn't surprise us totally based on what we have seen. From a technology standpoint, for the longest time, we reinforced those boundaries as well. When we think about supply chain planning, traditionally, manufacturing planning, distribution planning, when it comes to transportation management, it's someone else's job. When it comes to procure to pay, it's someone else's job, etc. So how can we bridge these together? I think we are getting there. What is getting in the middle is the tension at the organizational boundaries and the human behaviors and how people are measured and metriced as well. One example we were talking about is Jabil, where they collapsed these roles and made the chief supply chain officer responsible for procurement as well. It's a sudden shift in terms of how people think and behave. So, the reverse of demand idea, there needs to be some work on the organizational front. It's not just technology, and data is one aspect of it.
Right. Okay, Regina, let's see what Bill's table said. What was your conversation, Bill?
So I think there were two topics. One specifically on the insights from the data we saw. What struck us was how people had exceeded their KPI expectations and yet failed to meet just about everything else.
Exactly.
So what does that say about the extent to which KPIs capture real success
Real stuff,
factors?
right?
The second thing we talked about, I think, overlapped with what Madhav said, which is, and Brett's the only actual supply chain professional at the table. The rest of us just like to speculate on stuff and build solutions around it. But he was saying, the logistics, if you're consolidating from 8 vendors in one port into one shipment to then bring across the ocean, how does that contribute to supply chain variability if you can't coordinate that well across multiple enterprises?
Right.
So,
He's going to talk about that tomorrow a little bit. How about this table, Regina? Thank you. Okay. Your table, Jenny? What was your conversation?
Yeah, so
everybody gets an opportunity to talk, Kay.
We had actually two kind of themes around our conversation, and the first was on trust and how people have lost trust in the data and how the perception of the accuracy of the data changes depending on your role in the organization. If you ask the CEO, it's probably great. If you ask the analyst, it's not so great. And really, we need to close that gap so that everybody understands what quality data means and how it can drive decisions. And the other thing that we talked about were silos, that everybody kind of has a hot potato that they're tossing. If customers are happy, then that's a good thing, but they don't look at the other roles and the other parts of the supply chain and where they might be failing.
Okay, good. Marty, your table, any insights to share?
Yeah, I think echo most of the conversation. I think we were talking more about the inertia in decision making, especially because of execs not wanting to disrupt or rock the boat, if you will. And that pretty much is very reflective of where multiple back-to-back disruptions in the whole macroeconomic and all pandemic and everything, right? Kind of changing and really challenging status quo today in the world that we are in. So,
thank you. So I want to talk a minute about leadership. In the 1980s, we started barcode scanning. And it wouldn't have happened without Danny Wegman and Sandy Douglas and the Smuckers and P&G. And nobody asked what was the return on investment to scan a product. But they had a vision that when a product was scanned, it would translate the product identity of that product. That was the leadership, right? I remember in 2012, I got a call from McKinsey, who was doing some work with GS1, and GS1 was looking to expand their work on standards past consumer products into healthcare and medical device. And I said to McKinsey, why would they do that when they've had such little adoption in consumer products? And they're like, oh, because it's really needed in healthcare. I'm like, okay, I'm really all about standards, so I get it. And I was asked to facilitate a panel at the GS1 conference with 5 medical device manufacturers. And offline, I had a conversation with them about GS1 standards and the adoption of GS1 standards, and they said, Laura, we're not going to do it. It's just too much money. I'm like, you make 20% margin. Why is it too much money to adhere to a standard? Well, we're not going to do it. But then they got on the stage, and I facilitated a conversation that I thought was a false representation of the dialogue I'd had with them offline. Yeah, they were going to do it. Yeah, it would just take a little bit of time. During the healthcare crisis, when I called Steve Downey in his prior job, 22% of medical device was GS1 compliant. There is no leadership when that happens.